But we don't have an Apple, we don't have a Google, we don't have a Facebook. So what have we done instead? We've built the world's biggest IT companies, for example. Right? Of the top 10 IT companies in the world, 5 are Indian. Of the top 5, 3 are Indian. The world's most valuable IT company is TCS, India. 2.4 crore babies born in India every year.
Right.
This is an obvious market we should address. Toys, diapers, cream, whatever.
Hi, I'm Arvind Radhakrishnan. Welcome to Upstart by WeWork Labs, a WeWorkIndia initiative. With Upstart, we want to focus on giving you everything you'd like to know from the startup ecosystem and hear the stories and insights from the people you want to hear them from, like my guest today. At the helm of one of our most successful venture firms, he's actually seen India and the Indian ecosystem from a very early stage, and now on the track it's on to build towards a $5 trillion economy. He's invested in over 90 companies in India and the US across industries, and at the seed stage and later on, and has actually backed some of the names in the startup ecosystem that have become household brands, including Licious, Tracxn, Darwinbox, YourStory, and several others. I think if there's one person who knows what it takes to sort of build and scale a company in India, it's Pranav Pai. Pranav, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. A big fan of you guys at WeWorkIndia.
Awesome.
So really, really awesome to be here.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. It is no accident. I'm just going to start with, it's not an accident that we wanted you for this episode.
Fantastic.
I know, yeah, I've personally heard you speak about this before.
Thank you.
I know it's a topic you deeply think about and that matters to you.
Of course.
So actually, I'm really excited for what we're going to get into.
Thank you.
Maybe we'll just jump into it.
Of course.
So the first question, I guess, to sort of contextualize the entire discussion, I just want to understand, could you tell us why this $5 trillion, $7 trillion, $10 trillion goal, why is it actually important? So we have this goal set by the government, etc. How does it translate into the lives of your average citizen?
It's a great question. So, we don't get taught this in school, which is the big problem, right? So it's important all of us discuss this more and more. So I'll give you a personal example from my life.
Sure.
I'm born in the late 80s. I'm a 90s kid. My earliest memories of anything happening is, that 1991, there's a big news. Everyone in my house is talking about something big is happening. That's my first very early memory. There's one TV on the entire street, right, where we lived. There was DD1, DD2. So everything's controlled and command. Government owns everything. Government decides what's on the news. Government decides which channels you get. Government decides when you get a phone line in your house. Government decides when the electricity is on and off.
True.
So it's a really weird time to think about being an Indian, but it seems normal to all of us because we grew up in that India. Sure. But it seems really weird to a Gen Z, Indian when you tell them, this boss, this is how we grew up, right? But that's the India we grew up in. And back then, when we liberalized, we opened up our market because we were a failed economy, right? Most people today forget that we were in real deep trouble, and India was almost forced to open up, move its gold outside, et cetera, et cetera. So when I look back at the last 35 years I've been in existence in India, and I'm Indian born and raised, a lot of why the targets we're setting today is important. Is important because we've been through a lot of pain since independence.
True.
And that's why when we say, what does it mean to be prosperous as an Indian citizen in 2024 or 2030 or 2035, whenever in the future, we need to appreciate the past we've been through. So the past is quite complicated. When we earned our independence in 1947, it took us 3 years to get a constitution live. Sure. It's difficult. It's a lot of people, a lot of different views. Every country going out of the British Empire, it was a complicated departure for every country. But we finally got our constitution up. But unfortunately for India, unfortunately for all of us, we committed to a very socialist, top-down, command and control type of economy, right? Now, what does it mean to be top-down, socialist, et cetera, et cetera? First of all, it means that it's not something we're used to. India was never top-down, command and control. We're a very open, entrepreneurial people, right? If you look at India's economic history pre-independence, up to the 1800s, China and India were the top 2 largest economies in the world.
Sure.
One of the Roman elders is famous, I think Cicero or someone, is a famous quote that trading with India will make Rome fall into poverty because of all the spices and cotton we exported and all the gold they sent here. So papers are written about this, right? So when a government wakes up and says, okay, we're independent now, I guess we're a country And guess what, guys? We're all socialists now. Get used to it, right?
Right.
It's weird. It's weird. Even our best entrepreneurs like Tata and so on, they're on record saying this doesn't work. What is socialism? Why are we socialist? But we never got an option to debate this,
Right.
as citizens,
Right.
normal, regular citizens, of course. So from the 50s till the 90s, I'm generalizing now, but it's one failure after the other on the economy.
Sure.
Our debts are not collected from the rest of the world. Britain owes us hundreds of billions of dollars of pounds of loans because they've taken a lot of money out.
Sure.
Our prime minister doesn't collect. We lend money to our neighbors. We don't collect it back. We need to invest in educating our children. We build one IIT, one AIMS, and we say that's done. That's obviously not enough.
Sure.
We need to invest in village-level schools. We give them panchayat, but we don't give them schools. So that becomes a problem for every panchayat. So it's a series of failures
Right.
in terms of economic prosperity, right? Which leads us to the biggest failure of 1991. Now, of course, our grandparents, our parents lived through this. All of us have been through this experience. One of my grandfathers was in the Navy. My other grandfather was orphaned. There's no family left for him. Even in my personal 1-2 generations back, there's a lot of pain. Right? So the country's economy is going through pain. It's a lot of pain. There's fewer opportunities. Your families are going through pain. All of us have that in our families. We have recent experiences. So it doesn't give you a lot of confidence as a young Indian growing up in the 90s, early 2000s to say, okay, this country's economy is where I will find my best opportunities.
Sure.
Right? But that is not the thinking in 2024.
Right.
If you talk to people in college today, if you talk to people in school today, if you talk to people 5 years your junior, right, or the rest of us who are left in the country, we're seeing a new energy, a new optimism. We're seeing opportunity like we never expected to see before.
True.
Right? Just in my own experience, when I was in school, India's GDP was less than $1 trillion. It was 800 million people living on less than $1 trillion GDP. Sure. That is almost nothing. The per capita is embarrassing, right? I remember a prime minister's speech, Manmohan Singh, because when I was in school, every day our teacher would pick up the headlines and read one headlines.
Right.
One day I remember the prime minister announcing that India will never be a top 10 economy, so we should not aspire to be. Weird, man. My prime minister is telling me I should not have an aspiration to be a plus. It's weird. As a school kid, it's a little bit demotivating, right?
Sure.
But I'm not saying my experience is special. That's what all of us went through, right? So when a prime minister in 2014, 2015, when he said India will be 10 trillion, right? It matters because that's never been discussed before.
Sure.
It matters to regular people like you and me on the street, voters in general, that someone's finally thinking about, yeah, we should have aspirations. We should be prosperous. We should be a large economy, right? So when I look back, when I was in school, sub $1 trillion, we have gone through 2 doublings from me coming from school to my first job.
Sure.
Right, 1 to 2, and then 2 to now almost 4.
Right.
This is my second job now. The last doubling of our lives is in front of us, from 4 to 8.
Okay.
Right, it'll happen in the next 10 years,
sure,
or less. From 8 to 16, it's a very large base to double, so it may take much longer than most of us will be around for. Let's see. Sure. But definitely till 8, it's going to happen. It's in our control.
Sure.
Right. And when a generation like us, we're all millennials more or less, when we go through 1, 2, 3 doublings,
right,
that's an experience, Arvind, that very few countries in the world can give today. In fact, very few generations across the world have gone through that experience.
That is true.
Right? And that's why it's important. Right. When you have 3 doublings, 3 continuous doublings of GDP, just the beta of the market, right, is 14, 15%, right? And so what is prosperous, what is a good investment is suddenly 20%, 24%. The aspirations raise up, right?
Right.
Suddenly a starting salary like one of the IT companies giving you 4 lakhs, I'm an engineer, no one's okay with 4 lakhs anymore, right? When I was in college in 2011, everyone's jumping at the 4 lakh job.
Right.
Today, 4 lakh job is like a defeat, right? IIT says if they get into IT companies, it's a bad year.
Sure.
Not a great year, right?
Right.
So what I mean by that doubling is a fundamental resetting of the aspirations.
Right.
And that's why I can go into more detail about economic growth rates and whatever. But for me, the confidence in the young Indian, the change of tone in the economy, someone on top saying we should have aspirations, and the energy in young Indians changing. Right? That I think if you don't have in a country as large and important as India, you'd be in a tough place. So I think I'm very grateful as an Indian that I'm doing my best work in India. I'm grateful that I have a chance for a large doubling. It's not older generations who benefited. There's a shot for all of us. Right? And I'm very grateful that we're building our own tech now, startups, venture capital. All this means that doubling is more real. Right? We can all participate. We can build new cool stuff.
Right.
So all that means more today. And that's why, for me, it's a really cool time to be an Indian.
Amazing. Couldn't agree more. I think there was a lot to unpack there, but maybe I'll start with just the growth, as you say, the doubling twice over one lifetime. I think so. It's obviously a gargantuan task, right, to grow a company as big and sort of complex as India. And I think it's one of the important distinctions to make is you have a growth rate. They call it the demographic dividend. They call it all these things. That's quote unquote going to happen on its own.
Yeah.
I think there's the other side also where there's specific effort that needs to be put in to actually grow certain sectors, set up those pillars of growth.
That's right.
So to your mind, what are those pillars? What is driving growth?
Yeah. So it's a really good question again, and there's some historical context to what we got wrong, and therefore we should do it differently this time, right? So again, with the Nehru, the first 3 terms, etc. The government decided what was important for the country, and there was no choice. There's no negotiation. There's no consultation. There's no let's talk to industry, see what they need. A few guys decide, and guys take it. There's no leave it, just take it, right? So guess what? We don't build our own airlines. We don't build large educational institutions. We don't build large hospitals. We don't build basic things for social necessity that any economy should prioritize, right? We control who can start steel plants, who can start cement plants. We control who can start shipyards, who can build ports, who can start railways. So everything becomes permission-led. Right? No human being can be trusted to lead an economy, one person.
Agree.
Of a billion people. It's impossible. That job description does not exist. Right? Even if a God-level AI will struggle for that kind of optimization. So what you need is a bottom-up understanding of what India's strengths are. Then a top-down understanding of what has worked for the rest of the world. And then you theoretically see where the match happens and incentivize, as a government, incentivize private industry and people in general to meet the need. Right? Instead, what we got is government competing to be the best in every industry. And obviously, one person like me versus the government of India, the government's always going to win. It'll always have a better airline than what I can start. You can always have a better HAL, aeronautics company than what I can start. Right? So it's impossible to build a great economy where the government is your main competition. It's just nonsense. But that's what we had in 1991. Right? So what's changed today? And there's one last historical context before what I think should happen in the future. What's changed today is India has recognized now for itself since 91 that export-led competencies are the single strongest determining factor for a country going past the middle income trap. Right? A middle income trap means the per capita income or GDP reaches, I think, around $2,000 or $3,000, which is where we are now. And it doesn't budge up from that. Right? India needs to be at $10,000 to $15,000 per capita GDP to be a prosperous nation, right? Reasonably prosperous given our PPP and so on. We're at around 2.2, 2.3 thousand today, right? So we have a 5x to go. It's a lot to do. If you look at the last 7 or 8 countries who have made it past the middle income trap, Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Korea, South Korea, and now China, we just got past it. All of them have many different approaches to capitalism, government control, some kind of social security net. Even not all of them are democracies, right? China is not a democracy. So you can't blame the system of government or whatever. You can look at one thing they prioritize in common throughout in policy, which is they all supported export-led services and manufacturing. Right? So Korea, for example, K-pop, K-makeup, K-clothes, K-fashion, whatever, K-everything. They've exported their culture globally now. You can argue it's the second most efficient country after the US to have done it in such an industrialized way, right? Even the music, everything has become global. China, of course, is the stereotype of manufacturing going global, becoming the manufacturer of the rest of the world, right? The last 20 years. So if you look at what India needs, we have to prioritize an open market that goes global on export services and export manufacturing. To be able to make sure our 5x on per capita is possible. Right? It's a doubling of GDP, yes. But we have another complication because the population is so large. Doubling GDP is not enough. It's the 5x on per capita, which is why you need the exports, right? So if we had, say, 500 million people, 500 million, right? Then the internal market is large enough. India is very productive. Our food production, our all the industrial production, our services markets, tourism, education, all of these are large enough businesses where, okay, you don't need to export everything yet. But for 1.4 billion people, you have to be export first, right? And that's why you're seeing this government get it. The last 5 years, the budget's been very export focused. PLI, sorry. Encouraging Indian businessmen, encouraging Indian startups, encouraging Indian entrepreneurs in general, SMEs, women entrepreneurs. at all levels, the government is trying to get behind businesses and say,
Right.
we won't compete with you. Let's give you the platform. Let's take you global.
Sure.
Right? Invest India. So you're seeing that common unifying motivation there
Right.
is that India has to be like South Korea, Japan, Singapore, become more global.
Right.
Right? And thankfully, just in Bangalore, where we have the perfect template for how to go global, Infosys, TCS, Wipro,
Sure.
Cognizant, all of them. Indian IT today is $260 billion in annual revenue. Of that, 220 billion is exports.
Sure.
Right? That's $220 billion coming into India every year by virtue of revenue. Right?
Yeah.
The RBI's single biggest contributor to our forex balance, because we send a lot of dollars out, right, for our imports. So who's bringing the dollars back in? It's the IT industry.
Sure.
Right? They move only people. They don't move goods. They don't move equipment. It's all
Right.
software that's being exported and managed.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
We're not reached that scale yet in all our manufacturing and goods export. Right? But if you see these two in isolation, services is where we lead the world.
Sure.
Right? You can argue again, like South Korea is the second to the US in culture.
Right.
We are the second to the US in software exports.
Sure.
No other country does as much as us. True. We export more software than Saudi Arabia exports oil. Right? So it's huge.
Yeah.
But on goods, we have a long way to go. Right? So Bajaj going global, Ather going global, Ola hopefully going global.
Right.
All these are more headline-grabbing companies.
Sure.
But Bharat Forge going global, Jindal Steel going global, Ultratech Cement going global.
Sure.
This also matters.
Right.
We should be able, just like China, we should make so much steel, cement, all this stuff
Sure.
that it's just a no-brainer for countries around us to import from us.
Sure.
Right.
Right.
L&T went and built all the 7 stadiums in Qatar for the World
Sure.
Cup, for example. Right. They
Right.
use all the Indian. They use all of the Indian raw materials for it. So I think that's a good example of how I think the overall bucket
Sure.
is not just the internal market; it's export as well.
Could you just break down for those tuning in on the manufacturing side,
Yep.
right? Because there is a school of thought that says manufacturing is where we should be focusing.
Yep.
But two things, the two sort of counter arguments to this that have been made is one, you have your low-end manufacturing.
Yep.
We may still not be competitive when it comes to China,
yet. That's
right? That's one piece. And also, if we were on low end,
Yep.
you have Foxconn that is making iPhones.
Yep.
But they are $50 billion. And you have Apple
Yep.
that sells the iPhones at $3 trillion.
Of course.
So this segment of the manufacturing, the supply chain doesn't actually make too much money. So
In comparison, yes.
Yeah. So how would you, to those, I mean, how would you break down the argument on, manufacturing might not be the best way
Yep.
to go.
Yep.
There is some amount, but like, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so it's a really important question, right?
Yeah.
And let's look at it again bottom up.
Right.
The last TV brand we built was BPL and Videocon.
Sure.
Do you remember, like, when we were kids,
Nice.
the Onida?
Onida, yes.
So cool ads, right?
Right.
Maybe you knew someone who owned an Onida TV. They don't exist today,
Yeah.
right? They've got totally obliterated.
Sure.
There used to be a Indian smartphone brand called Micromax. You may remember.
Yep.
Early smartphones. Most of the people in the, will remember Micromax ads as well.
Right.
They're nowhere today,
Sure.
right? They become actually a manufacturer like Foxconn or whatever.
Yeah.
So what has happened in the past when Indian companies have tried to build an Apple or a Samsung or a Panasonic or whatever, right? Sony, whatever. Number one, we don't have any support from the government.
Sure.
Number two, setting up manufacturing, land, electricity, water, permits, environment takes you sometimes a decade, right? In a decade, in electronics, for example, just to follow that train of thought, in a decade, the technology's changed 6 times. Customers have already built brand loyalty with other brands.
Sure.
All the distributors have already got their incentive plans in place with other brands. And if you launch a new brand, say, for example, today to take on either iOS or Android, for example, even on operating systems, no country in the world, no company in the world can compete with that duopoly, right? Sure. And the same thing happens in hardware and manufacturing as well. So on anything consumer related, I'm using consumer electronics as an example, but we're too slow, there's too much friction, there's not enough government support, there's not enough local capital investors back then, right? So it's impossible to build a globally competitive hardware company, right? And this is true for almost every industry you can think of, right?
Right.
At one point, we were importing more toys from China than we were making for ourselves, right? Now it's weird. We have 400 million millennials in India. Millennials, our age.
Right.
We have 220 million kids in school and college. Right. We have 24 million babies. That's 2.4 crore babies born in India every year.
Right.
This is an obvious market we should address. Toys, diapers, cream, whatever, right?
Sure.
Why are we importing toys?
True.
right? It's a silly thing to happen in a country which is producing the most babies on the planet.
Right.
Like when you talk of Tam and Sam and Som and all that, right? Guys, you can't get a more obvious large market than toys. But we're still importing more from China as of 2014, right? So we just didn't have the incentives. We didn't have a government. I'm sorry to say on the record, but we didn't have a government that cared.
Sure.
Right? And that means normal citizens like us who start companies, work in companies, whatever, we're building in isolation against monsters globally.
Right.
Right? The American companies have a powerful American government behind them. Same for China, same for Korea, same for Japan, same for Germany. Right?
Right.
We can't win.
Right.
And that's why asking the question of why don't we have an Apple or even a Foxconn for that matter. Now we're finally building a few, but we don't have an Apple, we don't have a Google, we don't have a Facebook. No country in the world has some of these companies anymore. Right? At least in hardware, the Koreans, the Japanese, the Chinese, Americans, they all have one, right? But in software, that advantage has become more pronounced. The world's Google is Google. The UK's Google is Google. Yeah. The world's Apple is Apple, right? Germany's Apple is Apple.
Sure.
They haven't built a local competitor to it, right? So some of these companies, especially in tech, have become so far ahead in the competitive advantages they had from the US that it's foolish to ask questions that why didn't we build our own? We couldn't have. There's no way. Yeah. So what have we done instead? We've built the world's biggest IT companies, for example. Right? Of the top 10 IT companies in the world, 5 are Indian. Of the top 5, 3 are Indian. The world's most valuable IT company is TCS, Indian, right? So we have done really well in that industry, again, without government support. Smart people figured it out. Right? In auto now, we manufacture, I think, around 6 to 7 million vehicles every year. We're second only to China now, right? So that's huge. And we should export more to Africa, Southeast Asia, Europe. Mahindra is going to Europe now. Tata is going to Europe now. Fantastic, right? In auto, we're catching up. But of course, BYD and so on, you would have seen the news, very, very hard to compete with. But let's try, right? But other things are important. Steel, cement, food, processed food, cornflakes and fruit juices and ketchup and so on. We're amongst the largest producers of food in the world, right? It's a very fertile country, India. Why aren't we the leaders in food production, right? Why are we still importing kiwis and pineapples and coconuts and palm oil and so on, right? We should be doing all that stuff on our own, right? So why PLI was important is we finally had a government, it's not political, it's just common policy, common sense, right? We finally had a government that said, yeah, it's wrong for us to be importing things we should be making ourselves, right? So let's fix all of this. So they fixed policy on cement, on steel, on auto, and we became really good in a lot of these, right? We had silly things like angel tax, which was just a friction point on something as basic as an angel check, right? It took 10 years, but it's finally gone. And it's not even this government, it was the last government that brought angel tax in the first place. It shouldn't take 10 years to remove a bad law, but it does, right? So this is a country that's still shaking off the hangover of being a socialist, fully socialist country. It's 25 years since, more than 25 years since, almost 30 years since liberalization, but we're still not all the way there, right? So it's a very long answer, but the summary is, we should have done it a long time back. We didn't, for whatever reason. We're trying now, and there's some things we can't do, so we shouldn't bother. But there are other things we should fix fast, right? And I think there you'll see the most, the multiple X's, 10X, 20X kind of shifts. I think that's where it happens. So hopefully, I'm an optimist on these points. I think we'll get our act together fast enough. I think the natural 4 to 8 trillion jump, right, the doubling. I think that solves a lot of these problems. And then without these, we can't go from 8 to 16. So the necessity now in this doubling to build all this is the highest it's ever been.
Amazing. I think your point about the PLI schemes, I'm going to come back to later when we talk about regulation. But you did speak about, so it's the role of a government is significant in enabling these, right? So if we actually break down this goal, 7 trillion, 10 trillion, whichever we're looking at, and we break it down into, say, 4 main stakeholder groups. So we have the government, public sector at large, we have the private sector, and then our space, the startup ecosystem, right? So if you break into these, what are going forward, what are the roles of each one of them? Where does one end, where does one start? I'm trying to assign accountability for this vision.
And it's a good question. So we'll work top down on this because it's easier to, it's more organized. So broadly, in any economy as large as ours now, you have 3 broad sectors. You have agriculture, which is all land-based. You have industry and manufacturing. And then you have services, right? Of which IT, startups, financial services, all of it is a part of it. In India today, 44% of our people working age, so above 18, work in agriculture. But they only contribute 20% to our GDP. Right? So we have the biggest problem in India is the people working in agriculture are not contributing enough to GDP, so they're not earning enough for themselves.
Right.
So they're all sub optimized on income, and therefore all our excess we're doing record tax collections, for example. Where is the money going? It's all coming back here to give them subsidy on electricity, food, gas, education, women's loans, etc., right? So this is a hugely unproductive segment of India's population. I'm not I'm not looking down at them. I'm being an economist for a minute.
Sure.
44% of the country, 20% of the GDP, I have a problem with this.
Sure.
This is a laggard, right? You look at industry now, it's roughly equivalent. Right. It's around 26% of the GDP. It's roughly 28% of the people, right?
Correct.
So it's one-to-one par, okay.
Sure.
It's tumbled along, it's done what it can. It has to get better, more productive, right?
Sure.
Services is the outperformer.
Right.
It's absolutely blown everything else out of the water.
True.
India is a 4 trillion economy today because of its services sector.
True.
Right? From food and tourism to IT and startups and banks and financial services and so on. We built best in world-class companies in India. Right. SDFC, one of the best banks in the world. Infosys, TCS, etc., best IT companies in the world. Bajaj, TVS, Mahindra, Tata, all becoming best in class. Right? So in services, whenever there's a services business, even Tata, Mahindra, etc., they've all built services companies. They have manufacturing, of course, but services does very well. Right. For example, Mahindra has Tech Mahindra. Right? Tata owns TCS. Sure. If you look at even how the business houses in India have grown, the services component is like a hobby 30 years back. It's become the largest earner and payer of dividend. Right? So India has massive advantages in services. Sure. We must not impair services. We must remove more friction, get out of the way, bow in front of them and say, boss, whatever you need, let's make it happen. Sure. Because the leverage in the people working in services is much higher than 1:1. It's almost 1:1.5. Right. What I can remember. Right. But PLI, everything is only focused on manufacturing. Correct. And why is that? We're still working under a very socialist mindset that we have a lot of young people in India and they think that they're not getting jobs. We have a jobs problem apparently. Everyone unfortunately believes that all the jobs will come from manufacturing and assembly line work. True. Unfortunately, that's not true. Right? Foxconn, for example, in China, very famous for bringing 100 million Chinese girls from villages into the cities, the eastern coast of China, giving them all those gloves and those assembly jobs. You've seen the photos, right? They work, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. They have some 16-7 ratio, some silly ratio. Right. They stay in the factory, dormitories, double-decker. There are, barbed wire fences. There are safety nets now on every floor because they go on top and off themselves. So it's a very weird culture. Sure. I must say, I hope that never happens in India. But they're very famous for giving 100 million Chinese girls jobs, and those girls lifted an entire generation of Chinese families out of poverty. Sure. Right? In India, that's not going to happen. Even when Foxconn comes here, they're not hiring the same number of people for the same output. Sure. So there it was 100 people for 100 units of work. Here it's now 40 people for 100 units of work. Right? There's more automation, there's more robotics, there's less human assembly required. Sure. It's a lot of monitoring and slightly managerial work, less human beings fidgeting around on electronics. Right? So manufacturing's changed. The same thing's happening in auto manufacturing. We need fewer people now on the assembly line than we needed even 10 years back. In fact, COVID accelerated the automation because people couldn't come to work, but people still need to make cars and parts and whatever, right? Sure. So the investment in automation that's come after COVID, because most families, most promoters who run these companies say, I don't ever want to run into a COVID situation again where my production stops fully. Sure. Right? So they have to invest in automation. Sure. So unfortunately, manufacturing in most sectors, from pharma to auto to electronics, whatever, right, is not going to need as much people in India going forward. Sure. So the government on PLI, I think it's a right intent, but it's not going to have the same effect on jobs. So that multiplier, 1:1, where we're stuck today, it may become 1.2, 1.3. Is it going to become 1.6 like services? No. Probably not. Right? Yeah. So I come back to the point that agriculture has a big problem. We need a lot of reform. I hope the farm laws and so on, we bring back some of those, right? But industry, we're doing a lot. Good. It's important. We need to do a lot more on services. Right. Services is our LeBron James. Sure. That's a guy who's going to earn us money for 30 years, right? Just keep him comfortable, keep him healthy. Right. All these are our junior kids, they're in the academy, they're doing fine. Sure. All promise, right? Future. Don't mess with LeBron James. Keep him healthy, right? Feed him every day, give him the ads, give him the money, give him the headlines. He's important. He leads the team, right? But I think, policy is where policy is. I think we're learning slowly to prioritize services. Sure. But that's where I see the friction point still. After 8 trillion, if we don't get this right, we're stuck.
Sure.
It is a middle income trap. There is no amount of acrobatics that will get us out of the trap.
Sure.
So I think it's very important we get this right now.
Sure. Absolutely. I love the analogy of keep LeBron James happy. The question now is, how do we recalibrate?
Yeah.
What do we start looking at? You mentioned policy.
Yeah.
But other than that, what do we need to start seeing in each of these 4 areas to make this vision a bit more tangible?
Yeah.
This is a bit of a...
No, it's a controversial question. See, because what is common sense required?
Right.
And what policy does today for whatever vested interest reason are 180 degrees apart.
Sure.
Okay. I'll give you very tangible examples. So I'll come back to the top-down stats.
Sure.
24 million babies a year, right? 400 million millennials, 220 million kids in school and college. This is going to be the largest, the peak of India demographics. It's never going to be more kids than this, more millennials, whatever, that generation than this, right? Because our birth rates are falling, women are having less kids in general, family sizes are falling and so on. It's becoming more developed.
True.
Right? We're going that direction.
Right.
I will argue that they let our entire generation down.
Okay.
Right? I'm an engineer, for example. The Manmohan Singh government announced reservations when I was in school. So most of you may remember, your whole planning for your career got tossed out in one day, right? Because suddenly number of seats are like 30% of what they used to be.
Sure.
Right? I'm a general category student. It's devastating to do that to your own young people. That suddenly, because of something in the past, you don't qualify for 60% of the seats anymore, right?
Sure.
I'm talking from this point of view.
Sure.
From the other point of view, yes, historical, whatever, cool. There's some justification. Suddenly, the bar is lowered for the remaining 60% to get into the premier institutions.
Sure.
Cool. It became a Hunger Games, right? Let's be very honest. It's a problem to have young people so frenetically competing for what should be infinite resource. Seats in colleges should not be a problem. But we didn't have enough IITs, we didn't have enough AIMS, we didn't have enough medical colleges. So our response to enough kids are not getting good education back then was to let's make it more difficult for kids to get good education by making them fight each other more intensely.
True.
Right? What's happened since 2014, which is interesting, is this whole concept has been challenged, and it's not like reservations being removed. It's saying the common sense reason was let's make more IITs, let's make more IIMs, let's make more NITs, let's give every state its own independence. Right. So NEP did a lot of things right in many ways. It opened up the barriers to education.
Sure.
It didn't remove reservation because there's a logic behind that. Fine, cool, I get it. That's a separate issue. It's a constitutional issue. But the scarcity of seats can be solved by making more colleges that quality, right? We're still not there. There's still a lot of obviously headlines about the teachers are not enough, the seats are not good quality, etc. That's all fine, right? Growing pains. But I'm giving an example of how prior to whatever political party was in power or whatever, I try not to make this political. But the ideology or the thinking behind it is very different today compared to when I was in school.
True.
Right? Has this change happened across industries now? Not yet. And there's a very interesting reason why. Right? In the last 10 years, if you look at the economic indicators, more villages have electricity, more houses have sanitation, so toilet, water, less of them are using gobar and so on, biofuels for cooking. There's more LPG, natural gas and so on, gas connection. All the health indicators in India, childhood nutrition, starvation, poverty in general, starvation in general, nutrition in general, everything's gone up from sub-Saharan Africa to now I think we're middle income, not middle income, but middle Africa, right? A little bit more developed.
Right.
For 70 years we struggled, for 10 years suddenly we fixed it. Right? It's not accident. Some policies had to be changed, more money had to be sent more efficiently to the ground for this change to happen. Right? So we have to ask ourselves, it was possible, why didn't it happen before? And there are a lot of obviously murky answers to that question. Forget it, not for today. But what I want to point out to the audience is that this was possible to do. Some incentives had to be changed. We had to build some technology like DPI, UP, the UPI, for example, sending money directly, DBT and so on. We did a lot of good work. But the thinking was the main barrier to this change happening. Right? People profited from people being poor and people having less access to whatever goods or services the government used to run for us. Right? If we push this to the extreme now, right? I'll go back to education. The best universities in the US are private universities. Stanford, Harvard, whatever, MIT, whatever, right? Of course, there are good state-led, University of Texas, University of Pennsylvania, and so on. But the best, the ones that you're aspiring your kids to go to one day, or you had a dream of going when you were that age, are the private universities, right? In India, we have the Manipas and the Shiv Nadas, the Premjis and the Ashokas and so on. Sometimes in 5 or 7 years, because Stanford all are 120 years, right?
Sure.
In a few percentage points in terms of time, they've become as big a brand in this country as those brands are in that country.
True.
Right? What does that tell you? It tells you that we don't need government to build everything. Right? Just give Indian entrepreneurs, Indian foundations, Indian businessmen freedom.
Sure.
Remove regulation. Right? Allow them to build the best-in-class services for the population of India. Right? Whether it's education, insurance, banking, whatever. We've done this in many industries.
Sure.
We've slowly denationalized. Right? When you create space for people to compete, to give the best goods and services, it's basic capitalism. Normally, they will make it happen because it's in their interest. It's a simple incentive structure, right? And one of the thinking was, first of all, we're socialists, whatever, it's wrong to give this business away. I hope we've gotten over that now. Sure. There's a second layer of thinking that said, oh, it's wrong for people to make a profit in these specific necessities.
Sure.
So we're just about getting out of that.
Right.
Our education universities are still not businesses, they are non-profit trusts, they run as trusts. Right?
Sure, yeah.
Hopefully one day they can be companies that go public, hopefully. Sure. But we're not yet there, right? So what I'm trying to give you as an example is the thinking still hasn't changed fully.
Sure.
So hoping for like American level capitalism is not going to happen in the short term.
Sure.
There's 70 years of baggage to reverse, right? There's still a long way to go. But the few changes we're making is leading to big differences.
Right.
Now, again, I think we have to ask ourselves, is India the kind of country that does things logically? Does it do it ideologically? Or does it do it out of necessity, no way out?
Sure.
Right? For example, liberalization was no way out. We were cornered, we had to do it, we opened up the markets, we were forced to, 1991.
Sure.
Right? The benefits are obvious. We would have totally failed if we didn't do it. Right? So, do we need to reach a corner like that again to make common sense changes? It's a good question to ask. I don't know. I hope not.
Sure.
I hope it will be logic, not even ideology.
Sure.
Any political party should say it's bad for kids to compete for seats like this. It's just inhumane. Just open up more seats, right? Figure out how to do it. Don't say it can't be done or it's wrong to be done. This is wrong.
It can definitely be done.
Build it, right? So we're still not there ideologically.
Sure.
I hope we don't reach a point where it's out of necessity.
Right.
So I think the logic now that Indians should be prosperous, it's bad to make kids compete. It's important to allow businessmen to have the incentives to make this profitable. Let them compete and build the best services.
Right.
And let government stop being competition to all these businesses.
True.
Right? Air India was a very important, I'd say, almost like a masthead, like figurative K-pop version of a win.
Sure.
Right? Because it's the last standing big government airline. It was hilariously unprofitable, right?
True.
Hilariously bad at service. It was the last airline you booked if you were going anywhere, right? It's only out of necessity you go to Air India.
Right.
Right? Every government babu was obviously business class every time in Air India, so no wonder it loses money.
Right.
But now that being given away, sold away, whatever it's done, right?
Sure.
And there's no government airline anymore, right? There's still a government bank, there's still government aeronautics company, there's still government railways government owns everything.
True.
But in airlines, that figurative change of policy, right?
That was big.
Makes everyone think now, yeah, this should happen more and more.
True.
Right? And suddenly Indigo and all these guys, their stock prices you've seen, it creates a lot of value in many ways, more jobs, more efficiency when you open it up.
Right.
So to answer your question, there are so many levels to go before we solve the jobs problem.
Right.
That I think there are other things, other priorities. But on jobs, I will leave you with one thought, 24 million babies a year.
24 crore.
No, 24 million.
2.4
crores.
Yeah, 2.4 crore.
24 million, Arvind, is a lot of people, dude. It's twice the population of Bangalore.
Right.
Every year. When some of us are engineers in this room, or if you I don't know if you did in a competitive exam, I did. 24 million babies are competing to get any resource in my year when I was born, right? To get into IIT now, when I was writing, if I had to write it, I was competing with, I think, 3 or 4 lakh kids, so 300,000-400,000. Right? And they're all the best of their year.
True.
Right? And inside that, there's another level of Hunger Games to get into the top 10,000 seats of IIT.
True.
It's inhumane.
True.
Like it's chicken shit Hunger Games.
Absolutely.
Right? It's very stupid. Like you would do this to your worst enemy country if you colonize them. You don't do this to your own people.
True.
Right? It's monstrous. Right?
True.
So it's a little personal for me also because I went through it. I still have bad memories.
Sure.
But the point is, do we need to create an environment where all 24 million babies of that year no longer compete with each other in this nonsense zero sum, but they have more opportunity. There's surplus.
Right.
Today we're not there. Right. So the math works out very simply. Out of 24 million, from what I have seen in the central bank, RBI's reports and so on, 10 million Indians come to the job market every year.
Right.
The remaining 14 either get married or go into agriculture or something else. They're not coming to the formal or semi-formal job market.
Sure.
We are creating around 9 million jobs a year and absorbing them by EPFO data. There's a gap of 1 million.
Sure.
Government thinks the gap is 7 million.
Right.
Again, they read the data wrongly. But from what we can see in industry, all of us, because everyone is recruiting every year, they're concerned about this. The gap is 1 million.
Okay.
Right? 1 million we can fix.
Right.
We can't fix 24.
Sure.
No country in the world has fixed 24. Even China, I think, got 15 million at the peak. Right?
Okay.
Because they were also birthing 25 million a year.
Right.
Now they're birthing 11 million a year because of one-child policy and so on. So
Sure.
they control the population as a choice. I hope we never do that.
Right.
That's another crazy policy. But can we do 24? No. But can we get to 10, 12? Yeah, I think we can.
Okay.
Right, with the right incentive. So it's a very, very thorny topic. It's very difficult to solve. I pity the government if they are trying to do all of this at once.
Sure.
Any government will struggle. But I'm trying to explain how complicated this is.
Right.
And that's why it's a little scary. I hope all of us can optimize in our own way.
Absolutely.
But a lot to do.
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest engines that can enable that change, at least at the grassroots level, and this actually brings me back to the startup ecosystem and our sort of field. That's the biggest engine of job creation potentially, right? Could be potentially.
Big promise.
So when you now almost rephrasing the same question, the effects of that. So the government, I mean, there's lots to do, but there are sort of incremental actions being taken every year, every few years, and that trickles down into business enablement.
That's right.
Now the startup ecosystem, now it's arguably gone through one cycle, right? We have the founders that started companies in 2008 and 2009.
The Flipkarts and so on.
Exactly. Now starting their own funds, advising.
Now funds,
so it's going,
companies.
right? It's, so at this sort of juncture, how, I mean, maybe we can take sort of a report card of how the startup world has responded to those changes that the government's been taking.
Of course.
And how well it generates jobs as well, right? So do you see a few years ago, about 6-7 years ago, there was a Me Too sort of, companies in India sort of blindly following, not blindly, but importing,
blindly, you can say.
importing business
I
models, business models from the West or from other global markets and sort of force-fitting that here. Have we, in India, recognizing these problems and recognizing what needs to be done, have we found our own groove as a startup ecosystem? Or do you still see a lot of sort of...
It's a great question. Very good question. Sure. So I would say we're in the end of our second cycle of venture in India. Okay. Right. So cycle 0 was 1998 to 2007-8. I don't even say cycle 1 because it's very few people.
Sure. IDG
mostly American came back. So Junglee.com got acquired by Amazon, and there was this cricket portal that got acquired by ESPN.
True.
I don't remember the name, but that was the only website for cricket I remember.
Cricinfo, no.
Yeah, cricket.
Cricinfo, right.
Yeah, so like old memories. So that cycle 0 was like just experiments, right? It was very, very nascent. It wasn't even a great country to invest in because our policies on investment were so messed up.
Right.
That it was really hard to take money in India.
Right.
Most of these companies were domiciled in the US or whatever, and US returnee, like people who studied at Harvard coming back, starting a company, whatever, like the Junglee guys. So I wouldn't say it was a full cycle, right? It was part cycle. I think the Flipkart guys, 2008, 2009, in Mobi, Naveen Tiwari, I think there was a couple of others.
Easygo.
So Make My Trip.
Right.
Paytm, Vijay Shekhar Sharma he was an SMS something company back then. Right. So I think widely in our industry, it's considered 2008, 2009 as a start of the first cycle.
Correct.
Now there were maybe 4.5 or 5 VC funds in India back then. Only Sequoia, it used to be Westbridge, Sequoia acquired them. Only the Sequoia, now it's no longer Sequoia unfortunately, the Peak team, right?
Right.
That's the only surviving name in its kind of original form. Kind of. They've changed a lot obviously, right? All of the 4 others, they've broken apart, whatever.
Sure.
So the first cycle of VC has some big companies. For example, Flipkart is like a huge exit. It's the biggest exit in India, 20 million, fantastic. Before the IPOs, that was like the only thing you could hope for, right?
True.
But I think a lot of those companies did well.
Right.
A lot of those VC funds didn't do well for whatever reason. All of them have their own explanations.
Sure.
So there was a lot of learnings taken away from that. The investors in some of those funds, the LPs as they're called, I met a lot of them. They're so traumatized, they're still not coming back to India. They're saying, we'll wait and see, Right. So anyway, there are a lot of learnings from the VC side. I think the founders did quite well. Sure. There was a lot of struggle. There was no UPI, no payments, no credit card. cash on delivery. They had to innovate on a lot of basic things that today we take for granted, right? So tough cycle, lot of learnings. I think 2 or 3 VC funds from India who started back then, Bloom, India Quotient, couple of others.
Sure.
They have survived. They're all middle first cycle VC funds.
Right.
Okay, they're returning their first exits now. The second cycle started around the crash of 2016.
Sure.
So you may remember 2014, 2015.
It was.
Yes, SoftBank, Tiger Global, Nikesh Arora, right?
Right.
He was in
Nikesh Arora was
he was a
SoftBank.
superstar. I mean, he did a lot of great investments, objectively great investments that did well for SoftBank after that. I think Flipkart was his deal. I think Paytm was his deal.
Swiggy, Oyo. I think
he did. So he led a lot of cool deals,
Right.
But that time there was so much money coming in that when 2 funds, SoftBank and Tiger, turned off for a year, 2016, everything crashed. Right? It showed you the very brittle nature of Indian venture.
True.
There were no local funds. All the follow-on capital was coming from outside.
Right.
And therefore, you're not surprised that a lot of the seed investments were looking at the US or China and saying, okay, there's Walmart there or Amazon there, Baba there, so we'll do a Flipkart and 30 loans, right?
Sure.
Only Flipkart survives, it buys Myntra, whatever, but Shoploos, LimeRoads, all those things are dead, right? You look at, say, mobility. Okay, there's Uber, this looks cool. There's some DD, whatever, that looks cool.
Right.
So Ola and 20 loans, right? And Ola is the only one that survives.
Sure.
It acquires taxi for sure, whatever. Food delivery, there's DoorDash, there's something else in China. So Swiggy, Zomato, thankfully 2, right?
Sure.
But everything, Food Panda, all this stuff, you remember.
Tiny Owl, all of these,
dead, right?
Sure.
So 2015, 2016 was like the peak of the hype cycle where discounts everywhere, coupon codes, everything is free.
Right.
All that venture money is just being given away to the customers, right? No one's building a business. And when the money turns off, everything's dead.
Sure.
Right? So I think a lot of the VCs who came out of that, a lot of them died, a lot of them couldn't make it. A lot of casualties, a lot of companies died. So it was a kind of an extinction event, I would say.
Sure.
But we are one of the firms who was started in that extinction event. And we started, thankfully, and a lot of people, like good firms like Solaris, Fireside, and so on, are all cycle 2. All of us started with this very basic assumption that, one, we can't just keep doing a Me Too, because that stuff dies fast and there are too many loans. Number 2, there's no follow-on funding in India, so we need to build stuff carefully.
Sure.
And we had an additional point. We said, there are no exits in India, right? Thankfully, Flipkart just about happened, and we said, okay, this is even more of a problem because a Walmart Hail Mary coming spending 20 billion is not a way to build a fund, VC fund practice in India. We have to be able to see our companies go IPO, right? So we spent a lot of time working on the IPO path in India, but the regulations were changing. And I think I must give credit to SEBI as our regulator. They did a lot of things right between 2015 and 2019 that allowed for startup IPOs from 2020, right? So it's not an accident. It was 5 years of work.
Sure.
At 314, we had a third point that said we have to build our companies like they're going IPO in India. Right. So you look at our portfolio, everything is domiciled in India. All our we have 4 unicorns. They're all domiciled in India. They're all building to go public in India. They had to raise follow-on money, unfortunately, from everywhere because that was a problem we couldn't solve. But the end state, how does everyone make money here, is the IPO. Right. And I think we were one of the few who did that. That turned out to be a really good decision.
Right.
So now we are in the end of cycle 2.
Sure.
There's 30 startup IPOs in India. We finished our first. We have a few more on the way. The big, like First Cry, Swiggy, Zomato, obviously, Mama, a lot of IPOs have returned money.
Sure.
Right? So you can argue second cycle learned its lessons. Not all of them, but learned a few. Right. There's still too much competition. There's still some Me Too. I think cycle 3, which will start from, I would say, 2026 or 27, will be the cycle we all look up to and say, this time it has to be different.
Right.
And I'll say 3 things will change. One, you'll have much better quality founders. A lot of founders in cycle 1 and 2 didn't make enough money, are angry about how they were treated, couldn't take the company IPO, sold too fast, whatever, or had success, right? Took it IPO, had success. And the ecosystem below them, all the Flipkart mafia, the Swiggy mafia, the Paytm mafia, all of those, right? Like her PayPal mafia and so on. All of them will start companies in cycle 3.
Correct. Right? Yeah, true.
I think the founder pool will be radically better in the first 2 cycles. Second, there's more money in India now. Right. After all the IPOs, everyone's made money. There are more Indian LPs. There are more Indian firms like us.
True.
There's more support from regular retail investors that give me more tech companies. Right. These things are doing well. Good stocks to own. So the demand from the public markets will be stronger. The Indian capital presence will be stronger, and so the whole venture pipeline will be a little bit more India first, which is good to see. Right. And the third thing, I think this will have to be different. China plus one is real. The US is getting more comfortable working with India. the Quad, Japan, so on, all that, the policy stuff has
Right.
changed. And lack of options. There is no other country becoming 10 trillion in GDP.
True.
Right? It's only India now.
Right.
And that is a massive opportunity. Just the beta is so high, it's a no-brainer to invest. Right? So all those LPs I spoke about who kind of burnt in the first cycle,
Right.
they'll come back for cycle 3 and they say, okay,
Sure.
we waited long enough, things have changed.
Right.
Let's do it again. Right? So I think cycle 3 will be big. I think cycle 3, I can't see beyond cycle 3 unfortunately because
Sure.
I'll be old by then, I'll be very biased. So I'll be an uncle. Hopefully someone else will start a better firm and I can retire.
Sure.
But I think cycle 3 is where, at 3 and 4, we're focusing very hard on what we'll do differently.
Right.
We've had success in cycle 2, yes.
Sure.
So our credibility is built there.
Right.
But cycle 3, if we don't change, we'll be outdated.
Okay.
Even we'll be outdated.
Sure. Amazing. Yeah, I can, and also I think the startup world as an investment asset has become much more
That's true.
acceptable. More money, even locally, is going into that asset class. So that's going to be very interesting. 26, 27. That's the time frame. That's very good to know. There's one thing you touched upon earlier, which sort of affects everything we're talking about so far. It's a colossal change coming to the whole world, which is the advent of frontier tech, right?
True.
Deep science, deep tech, including AI, obviously. Fundamentally going to change the things. You mentioned automation by Foxconn, so the labor to output ratio coming down. That's going to be accelerated. Meanwhile, we have a jobs market to think of. All of those things. How do you characterize what frontier tech's going to do to India?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great question. So, first of all, in terms of capabilities, India has built a lot of cool tech in the last 30 years, right? Since liberalization.
Sure.
For example, in IT services, you don't register IT services as cool, frontier, whatever, right? But the Apple Music Store, the whole iTunes Store, Infosys was one of the first investors in OpenAI, as before when Musk was still there, before Microsoft and ChatGPT was launched. There's a bunch of stuff we're doing in auto components, a bunch of stuff we're doing in cybersecurity. Unfortunately, not in India, but Indians in other countries. Let's put it that way. So we've been in that system for 30 years. Right? The talent pool is quite experienced.
Sure.
But the value layer on top, which is companies starting and holding the IP on their own, that is still weak. Right? What you're seeing in the end of cycle 2 now in venture is the first deep tech companies. Right? So Aether, for example, had to build a lot of its stuff on its own. And hopefully it IPO'd as well. Ola built a lot of its stuff on its own. It still imports here and there, you would have seen in the news, right? But they're trying. The same founders doing the AI stuff. You're seeing a lot of founders now recognizing it's important to own your IP. Right? Now, thankfully, when a country recognizes this en masse, so country by country I mean government, private, capital, and then founders, entrepreneurs, right? All 4 layers. It takes a long time for everyone to say, yes, this is important. Normally, the founders realize first and they wait for 10 years for everyone else to wake up, right? And they try to start companies and they die, unfortunately. So we've been through that now. A lot of deep tech companies have died. But now I think all 4 have woken up. When the army starts saying make in India, procure in India, then you know everyone is alive. Right? And that's happened now. So I think from space to AI to I hope even quantum and some of these early frontier areas, you will start seeing more attempts at innovation and more support top down. Right? Where are we missing though? We don't have an educational foundation. We don't have research universities. Right? We have a lot of post-research development. For example, the largest number of GitHub accounts in the world now comes from India. Largest or second largest. I think we're competing with the US, right? So a lot of, what is GitHub? It's basically developers putting up their code for either private or public consumption. But they are taking existing code, rehashing it, refactoring a little bit, and making something on top of it, right? So we are great at taking IP legally. We don't steal. Thankfully, like China, we don't steal yet. Not yet. And we shouldn't. But we take IP that's existing and we make it better. And we make it into an application, right? The only country that's built world-class IP for almost 70 years now is the US. And that's because they spend $100 billion a year. Like it's absolutely madness. DARPA, university grants from top down, right? For 70 years. It's a lot of money that they've spent. A lot of mistakes they've made, a lot of money is burned. But from GPS to the internet to the smartphone chips to AI now, right? Everything has come out of that spending. And it's all gone from the government to universities and then back to eventually taxation, right? It's a big fortuitous loop. And that's why Apple, Google, Facebook, etc. are all beneficiaries of that system, right? We don't have that in India. No country has it at that scale. China tried. It came close, but unfortunately, they had to steal a lot of IP to do it. They stole from
Sure.
the Germans, they stole from the Japanese, they stole from the Koreans. Of course, they stole from Cisco and Qualcomm and all those companies in China, in the US. A lot of, obviously, I don't want to go there, but there's a lot
Sure.
of IP cases on that whole economy. So we see very simple two paths. Either you spend that much money for 50 years,
Right.
which we are a long way to go to catch up, or you
Right.
steal, right?
Right.
There's the only two models that have worked.
Sure.
Now, what can India do? India can't spend that much money.
Sure.
India can't steal. We're bad at stealing. Let's put it very basic.
Sure.
Right? So we have to figure out a third path, say, or we say, okay, this is not an option. We'll try to invest in our own way.
Right.
The talent, the diaspora of India talent, right? Maybe that's a new advantage that's never happened before.
Right.
China didn't have such well-regarded global talent like
Sure.
India does, right? The US has talent globally, but they're all building US companies first,
True.
right? So maybe there's a talent dimension that is a third way. I don't think so. I think it's weak. I think we'll have to spend. So
Sure.
it comes back to putting research, government money, grants, more IITs, more ISCs.
Sure.
But again, that's 30 years down the line.
Right.
So short answer to this question is we are going to be behind on a lot of things. We have to accelerate spending.
Right.
We have to work with industry faster.
Sure.
And we have to make this a national priority.
Sure.
Right?
Right.
In the last 4 budgets now, the finance minister has always said National Science Foundation grants, research grants. She announced space grants for space
Sure.
tech recently,
Right.
agri-tech.
Right.
Fintech never gets grants, it only gets punished. But a lot of other things get grants, right? The money's not flown yet. But
Right.
you can see top down, the thinking and the idea is changing.
Right.
Unless it actually becomes money that flows, research centers that are open, industries that start labs, we don't build the advantage.
Right.
So I think on deep tech, what you should see now is very talented people who are Indians coming back to India, starting companies,
Right.
medtech, AI, semiconductors, chip design, power systems, space, communication, 5G. I'm seeing a lot of these deals already,
Yeah.
right? And it's very, very good to see. 70% of them have some global work experience before they come back,
Right.
which is very good, and they don't steal. 0 companies I've seen are proud of, oh, I got this, whatever.
Sure.
None of them are stealing anything. They say, we know enough, we'll build our stuff. We need
Right.
some money, right?
Sure.
Cool. I think this is not just a question of everyone becomes rich on paper in theory. You start a company. That's not true, but okay. Everyone sees social network and they think it's
Exactly.
how it works. But I think Shark Tank did more than anything else for Indian entrepreneurship. Because you finally saw, see, when I was in school, again, sorry, I keep making this personal, but engineer, doctor, no lawyer, no accountant, none of that. No cricketer, no actor, no singer.
Sure.
It's just 2 or 3 fields, right? Everyone has to be in these 2 or 3 fields.
Right.
When a batchmate of ours would say, I like Rahul Dravid, he went to my school in Bangalore. I want to be like him, I want to play cricket. He's a decent cricketer, right? His parents will be the first one to shut him down.
Sure.
It's not a job, right? Today, if you look at entrepreneurship, when I came out of my undergrad in Bangalore, starting a company was not a job. No one even thought about it.
Right.
It was IT jobs, whatever.
Sure.
The year I graduated, Flipkart came to our college. I still remember we had to go to the computer lab, remove our shoes, ask for permission to use the internet. You get a 15-minute slot. It takes 5 minutes to boot up the computer only. And then type into Google Flipkart and, okay, what is Flipkart?
Right.
Because they're coming for placement 3 hours later. So we've gone from that to now Shark Tank on TV.
Mainstream. Yeah.
Some auntie from Jaipur can come and sell 4 crores worth of earthenware in a week, right?
Right.
Her life's changed. That's a fantastic story, right? I love that story.
Yeah.
That wasn't possible when I was in college.
Sure.
It was impossible.
Sure.
But it's possible now in 15 years.
Right.
So I think the fact that that cultural shift has happened
Right.
is enough.
Sure.
Don't damage people's optimism. Don't damage young people's hope.
Right.
Allow people to yearn for prosperity. It's very important, right? Across social segments.
Sure.
There's no reservation, none of that needed here. Just give them hope. Right? Allow them to build. I think, therefore, if you look at it, government has only 2 things to do. Incentivize, make it easy for people to come back,
Right.
and make it easy for people who come back to get the money if they're academicians.
Sure.
Right? I think 2 out of 4 if we do, the other 2 will take care of themselves.
Right.
Then you have this 8 to 16, suddenly the infrastructure, right?
Right.
We're getting close to having.
Sure. Right. Amazing. I actually, the point you mentioned about that culture shift, that hit home for me, because I think when I was a founder and I was actually, and the company was doing reasonably well,
Right.
I would still get messages from my family saying, why don't you apply for this job? It seems like what
won't
you're
get married if you
better
don't.
than what you're, yeah. So
The practical
that's-
problems.
I love it. I love the pride that a founder today takes in saying, I've done this, right?
And that is
Some
brittle-
work to do.
See,
but yeah.
that pride, right? That confidence, I would say.
Yeah.
it's very it doesn't exist in tangible terms. You
Right.
can't like write a policy to give people confidence.
Sure.
It's impossible. Right?
Yeah.
It's something that builds out of the collective aura of a society.
Sure.
Right.
Right.
Now, you can't change society in 10 years. It's very difficult to do.
True.
So the fact that it's changed in 10 years tells you it was always there.
Yeah.
It was pummeled and buried and not allowed to express itself.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
What has happened in 10 years is not ignition of it. What has happened is remove the rubble
Unleash
so
it.
it can
Right.
remove the rubble so it can grow.
Sure.
Right? The seeds are already there.
Right.
They were always there. They wanted to grow.
Right.
They weren't allowed to.
Right. Right.
So I think this permission mindset, you now have permission to be a founder.
Good way.
Right?
Yeah.
That is what we have to solve.
Sure.
And I think that's what is being solved now in real
Right.
time.
Very true. Love that. Another reason I think this figuring out the formula for what makes innovation work, how do you remove barriers, all of those things. And it's something we've struggled with, I think, in India for a while. It's also parallelly one of the biggest engines of growth we have going forward, which is tier 2 plus.
Yeah.
It's been sort of the holy grail for a lot of consumer startups, a lot of other people trying to enter there, because that's the biggest market, 60% or more of our country.
True.
What do you think we've learned so far about actually making those more accessible?
Yeah.
And how do we enable a stronger, more robust, sustainable, like bringing them into the fold? It should not be this first of all, the nomenclature of tier 2,
one,
tier
tier
2, it's really,
agree.
So how do you bridge that?
Yeah.
How do you make a national net?
True. It's very important. So I hope no one needs to be told why it's important.
Sure.
It's obviously important.
Yeah.
I think we made a few mistakes in policy. Again, this is historical baggage that we've still not fully reversed.
Right.
So for example, if you look at the last 15 years, I keep saying 10, I should say 15 now.
Sure.
Remove the politics out of it, right? In the last 15 years, from 2011 to 2024, right? The single biggest earner of generational wealth for India is not the stock market, is not founders going IPO, it's land.
Absolutely.
Because the government has eminent domain on land, right? Meaning the government can tell me, sorry, your house is now part of some road project, you have to sell.
Right.
I can't say no.
Sure.
The government has a first right on by constitutional rights. So it's only a question of now give me a good rate. Right? There's a negotiation.
Right.
In the last 15 years, we've built so much new infra, right? From ports to roads, highways, airports, and every time we commission, for example, the Bangalore airport.
Right.
I remember in school there was a huge debate: will it be in the north or will it be in the south? Right. Different politicians own different passes, so depending on who was in power. Finally, we got a really good airport, and it's very
amazing.
Good. Tier 2, Terminal 2 is world class.
Yeah.
All those people who own the land there, right? Now, there's some politicians, of course, remove that, but there were a lot of regular tier 2 people who never participated in Bangalore's like meteoric rise back then, right?
True.
Suddenly, they have more wealth in the last 5 generations of their family.
Right.
Right. This has happened in every single village. Tier 2 town in India.
Right.
The roads, the airports, the railway stations, whatever, bus stations, factories, industrial land, SEZs. So much of land has been unlocked for people. Gurgaon is a very good example also.
Right.
A lot of people, all of new wealth there, right?
Absolutely.
So that has been a massive, big income shift in tier 2, tier 3 also, right? Now, if you look at the headlines every day, Mercedes-Benz is every year breaking records on sales in India.
Right.
BMW breaking records in sales. Cartier breaking records in sales. Louis Vuitton bags breaking records in sales. Tanishq every year, 30-40% growth in revenue, right? All of this is not just startup IPOs, whatever funding.
Absolutely.
It's mass India making money like they've never made before.
Sure.
Right? So luxury seems to be this really good dipstick of the extravagance, there is extravagant spending.
Sure.
Is wealth being created in India and waste wasn't being before? And the answer today is absolutely yes. Right? Unfortunately, a lot of that is one-time spends. They're not going to keep buying Benzes forever. They're not going to keep buying Cartier forever, right? It's like a celebration thing, whatever, wedding, whatever. So that's an indication of, yes, now more people are moneyed, right? Now to institutionalize the creation of wealth like this, government can't keep buying land forever.
True.
Right? What you need is for the people who made the money to now protect the capital and earn more on top of it differently.
Sure.
Right? So that's why fintech is important. Why is wealth tech suddenly cool, right? There's a lot of funding going on.
Absolutely.
The wealth tech is interesting now because for the first time, so many people have wealth that can't access the wealth managers and all these relationship guys, right? They're looking for apps, looking for ways to manage it on their own. Suddenly building AI for them or Deserve, a lot of good, cool companies, Wind Wealth, so many guys are building all this stuff. Suddenly, enough Indians have this as a top of mind concern.
True.
I want to make sure my money is not being wasted.
Right.
I can't keep buying Cartier and Louis Vuitton.
Right.
Right. And how many more houses and apartments will they buy? After a
Sure.
point, real estate also becomes illiquid and so on.
Sure.
You saw recently with the policy.
True, true, true.
So I think now you're seeing the second order, third order effects of that wealth creation.
Sure.
And that's why so much money coming to the stock market now
True.
is creating records in terms of the Nifty.
Right.
Right. So it's a big flow from 20 years back, all the land, 15 years back, all the land acquisition and so on, to now record stock market highs.
Right.
It's one full narrative you can weave last
Right.
15 years. Now, to push this forward, how will the next wave of wealth be earned?
Right.
Right? And there's only 2 or 3 answers. One is agriculture becomes more productive, more commercial grade, more industrialized, and it creates the same kind of wage security that manufacturing does.
Sure.
Right? So it's no longer subsistence in agriculture. You collect all the land, you make contract manufacturing, etc., etc. So you professionalize agriculture.
Right.
If that happens, we're not doing it yet. It's in small pockets. Like tea and coffee has become this, for example.
Right.
Sugarcane has become this, for example. Right.
Okay.
Spices are becoming this now. Horticulture is becoming this.
Okay.
But rice, wheat, millets, all that, still a long way to go. Cotton, still a long way to go. So if agriculture becomes the same kind of wealth earner, it becomes like industry.
Right.
That should be a massive wealth creator in tier 2, not tier 2, tier 3 and 4.
Sure.
Right. Second, I have to put this in a politically correct way, but when inheritance happens,
Right.
and we have talks of inheritance tax and so on, which is a totally wrong idea.
Right.
But when wealth transfers between generations, the way the wealth is spent after a transfer is monumentally different.
Right.
Right. Around, if I remember correctly, I think almost $1 trillion of wealth in India is going to pass through inheritance.
Right.
Also, in the midst of it. Right.
Sure. Yeah.
You can see all the big public market families
Absolutely.
all transferring now. The next generation's coming in.
Right.
$1 trillion of wealth is not fun. That's a quarter of our GDP.
Right.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
So you'll see now they will spend money differently. If we don't do it right, if we mess up policy here, they'll all leave India. And unfortunately, a lot of that is happening now. Right? Going to Dubai, going to Singapore, whatever.
Sure.
But if we do it right,
Right.
they'll spend more in the economy. They'll build new houses. They'll start companies. They'll start new businesses. This happened in the US the right way.
Sure.
And it led to this big economic boom after the baby boomer generation.
Right. Right.
The stock markets of the 80s and the 90s and so on. The tech companies and everything. So I think that's a big potential. I hope we get that right. So that's tier 1, 2, 3, 4. Everyone's going to get an inheritance next generation, right? And the third thing, the last thing is today, less women in India in general have worked professionally, right? India made a big mistake in the socialist era. We didn't make it easy for women to join work. We didn't educate them as much. We didn't have the right policy in taxation, so we could have given incentives.
Sure.
China gave a lot of incentives to companies recruiting women and women taking jobs. Right? Which is why so many women join the workforce.
Right.
Now that's happening. More women engineers graduate every year than men.
Right.
More doctors are women every year compared to men.
Okay.
Women get higher grades in college than men.
Right.
Right. Women are getting jobs faster than men.
Right.
Right. Because the diversity, board, so on. That's really a big cultural phenomenon in India.
Right.
So if we get the women contribution to workforce and income right, which I think the next generation, our generation is the first, and the next generation will do better.
We'll do better.
That brings a much more productive dimension to India's workforce than we had before.
Right.
Right. And of course, declining fertility, smaller families, and so on. All that is a consequence.
Sure.
So this is what you can expect going forward. Now, is it enough? No. It's too many people. There's still a lost generation. A lot of millennials our age don't have the opportunities we did.
Sure.
A lot of them didn't get engineering degrees. A lot of them, unfortunately, don't have jobs today.
Right.
Swiggy, Ola, Uber, you're seeing them rushing into that, right? Blue collar, grey collar. The last thing we could do, and that's why the apprenticeship program, the internship program, in the budget, this budget, I think we made good first moves. If we go back to all of them and say, let's train you to be carpenters, plumbers, drivers, technicians, port handlers, airport tarmac operators, there's a lot of jobs we can create for a country doubling again. Right? But it needs a lot of top-down effort.
Right.
Skilling. It needs a lot of skilling. Right? Again, that's money that you will not see profits from immediately.
That's incredible. I'm going to end, I think, on a topic that, on the one hand, has been talked to death. On the other hand, does not have a conclusion. Right? So, the funding winter.
Yeah.
Right? So so it's sort of a double question. One, where are we? Where are we in it?
Yeah.
If we are still in it, how far? Yeah. What needs to happen? Why is this happening? Why, what's where's the light at the end of the tunnel? The second one is, if we look back, it's been about 2 years now where it's been
Yeah.
very predominant.
Yeah.
What is the effect it's had,
Yeah.
positive and negative?
Cool.
I suppose you can round it out with what would you advise founders
Sure.
building
That's
now?
a good question. It's actually very complicated. No one saw 2021 coming.
Sure.
This just massive spike up and everything's like going to the moon.
Right.
From crypto to the local Dream 11 whatever group you're a part of, right? Everything's doing well. I think assuming that's normal is futile. Right. So just don't assume 2021 is like the normal.
True.
Just like there'll be a really bad crash, which we went through in 22, for example. The rise up is also really bad for long-term health. Right? So don't build a model on either of those events. Here's where I think we are right now.
Right.
The US controls the dollar and is the largest economy in the world. USD investment flowing to the rest of the world is a significant signal for whether we're in a recessionary environment or not.
Right.
Since 2021 December, the money flow in the US and outside has been on its way down like this.
Okay.
The bottom was, I would say, October 2023.
Okay.
Right? Since October 2023, from money supply to the NASDAQ index, it's been going up like this.
Right.
In fact, now it's higher than 2021.
Right. Okay. Sure.
Now, the problem here is if you just look at the data, we are already in recovery mode and way past the last peak.
Sure.
If you look at the news, funding winter, things are bad, everyone is angry, no one's making money.
Sure.
Please reduce the interest rate, government reduce the interest rate. Everyone's saying the same thing.
Right.
So second lesson we learned in the last 5 years is that the news lags data by at least a year.
Sure.
Right?
True.
Whether it's intentionally or not, I don't know. There are conspiracy theories for all this, which I don't know. I've never seen evidence of, but in school, it's a nice Reddit post at least. There's a lot of difference between what's actually happening with money and what the news or the mainstream is telling us about the money.
Sure.
Right? So who's made money since October 23 to now? All the hedge funds, all the institutional investors, everyone, all the founders of these companies, the promoters, the employees, anyone who stuck to either buying in the bottom and holding, or just stuck through and just held and didn't sell, everyone is happy.
Sure.
The money is being made, right? This is the US market. Now look at India. India didn't have a catastrophic fall in 22. In fact, you can argue we got some kind of supercharged rocket fuel in the middle of 22. All the IPOs now started.
Sure.
Everything's just bang, bang, bang. Everything's just gone up and up and up and record.
Right.
For the first time in our economic history, the rest of the world is thrash, war, this, that, elections, everything is crazy. And India's public markets and India's economy are in too rosy a picture for us to take it without a grain of salt.
Sure.
Everyone in the news is asking us, dude, something has to be wrong.
Right.
What's going on? Is there some war that's coming? People are going to YouTube and Googling astrology now to see what someone's predicting. See, now, for the first time in our history, this is really it's weird. We're searching for reasons for this to not be true.
Right. Sure.
So it's a weird place. I'm not surprised founders are in this very schizophrenic environment.
Sure.
Because everything's great, but if you talk to VCs, everything is trash.
Sure.
Right? If you talk to the US, everything is trash.
Yeah.
You talk to European VCs, Japanese VCs, everything is terrible.
Yeah.
The Japan market fell like 20%, biggest correction in recent history, right? So it's weird. I would say if I were building a business today, right, the US bottom and now on the way up.
True.
Look at the data. We are already in a recovery.
Right.
India is in a peak now.
Sure.
Right? I can't tell if we'll fall or we'll just slow down.
Sure.
But both of them is possible, right? Depends.
Sure.
If there's a war, for example, it'll fall for sure.
Sure.
Right? But let's see. So what I would do if I were a founder is don't aim for a 5 million, 10 million seed, 20 million Series A, 100 million Series B. That's nonsense.
Sure.
Right? There are companies going public now, like Exigo, for example, who've not even raised 100 million in their entire life cycle. Right?
Yeah.
So why would you aim for that in one round?
Yeah.
So I would say founders, we used to build great companies with a 2 million seed, with a 5 million Series A. That's what normal was in India. Right? Flipkart follow that, Baiju follow, everyone follow that same very rational type of path. Just build that way. We're very good at it. Right? You'll go IPO in 10 years. Build a great company. India doing very well right now should give you confidence that there is an IPO market that will value you if you build a good company in 10 years. Right? So today you actually have less uncertainty than we had even 10 years back. 10 years back when a lot of our best companies were started, none of them would believe us, and even we couldn't say, boss, it's going to happen for sure, that your IPO will happen in India. It was, guys, let's try. It has to happen one day. Let's try to get it done. Today, you're not in uncertainty.
Sure.
You know that if you're a good company, you'll go IPO.
Right.
So I think founders should just focus on the data, right? End state, I know it's
Sure.
going to happen. I don't need 20 million, 30 million, whatever. Rational seeds, rational series is. Let's build.
Sure.
Right? The talent is great. The Indian market is good. More people are spending money. There's optimism in the country. Hopefully 4-5 years of political stability, right? Narrow
Right.
window. No reason not to start.
Right.
So that's how I would optimize for what we can control
Sure.
and
Sure.
hope for the best on other things. And
Sure.
thankfully not build blind anymore, which
Sure.
is great news.
Incredible. Pranav, I think I can talk about this for another hour easily with you.
Right.
But I think we've covered everything. I think we've covered this from every single angle. Maybe you could do a follow-on
Happy to.
in some time to see how these pan out, but super interesting. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
And yeah, I mean, hope to have you back soon.
Of course.
Thank
and
you
I hope
so
this
much.
does well. Congratulations
Absolutely.
on launching this once again.
Thank you so much, Pranav. Amazing.
I had a really good time at the first episode of Upstart by WeWork Labs. We had a great conversation, and I hope Arvind and his team do a lot more of these. I really enjoyed speaking here on a range of issues, and I hope to come back again and do a part 2, hopefully with better news to share with all of you watching. Thank you very much.